Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We hope your family has enjoyed a wonderful holiday season. Happy 2024. I am your host, Alexandra Rollins, and I'd like to welcome you to the third episode of Season 4 of our Experts in Learning Differences, a Speaker series. Viewers are joining us from all over the United States to understand more about the essential tools needed to support your child with ADHD and how to navigate the intricate aspects of ADHD in kids with learning differences. Despite the adversity your children may face, they can overcome it and be successful. We bring you this show from the American Academy, where we have two campuses in South Florida, one in Broward County and the other in Palm Beach County. Students from kindergarten through 12th grade with mild learning differences and ADHD attend the American Academy, and we are proud of the fact that 100% of our graduates are accepted to colleges and universities each year. In the first part of the hour, our expert guest will guide you through a comprehensive exploration of ADHD topics, providing valuable insights and evidence-based strategies, from understanding ADHD and executive function to practical tips for managing distractions at home. We will untangle the complexities of ADHD's impact on the daily lives of children. During the second half of our show, we will turn to questions submitted by you, our viewers. To start, I'd like to briefly tell you about our expert, Brooke Schnittman, ADHD coach, three-time best-selling author of Activate Your ADHD Potential and founder of Coaching with Brooke, an ADHD and executive function coaching company for students, adults, and parents. You are busy, Brooke. Brooke is an understanding and experienced ADHD coach who knows the challenges of living with ADHD firsthand. Diagnosed as an adult and part of an ADHD family, Brooke empathizes with feelings of frustration, overwhelm, and shame. She decided to use her personal and professional experiences to help others facing similar struggles with ADHD. Brooke, good evening. We're truly honored to have you on our Expert Speakers Series. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I'm excited to be here.
Good. We're so excited to have you on our show. So we'll jump right in and tell us how you became connected to learning differences, ADHD, and coaching. Do you have a personal or professional story you'd like to share?
Sure. So definitely feel like I was an educator in my mom's womb. I came from a family of educators. My grandfather started a school in Kemp. My dad took it over. My mom was a math teacher. So naturally, when I wanted to be a fashion designer growing up, my mom said, yeah, that's not happening. You're going to be a teacher. I'm like, okay, great. So here I am. So I followed that path, but I definitely had it within me. I used to teach my sister, play school with her growing up, even though she was smarter than me and she could probably teach me a thing or two about what I was teaching her. So when I graduated, I went to undergrad in general education. And what I noticed is that there was only one class in special education. And there was something about the special education and learning differences that I was super interested in. So I capitalized on that and I said, okay, I'm jumping into my master's degree and I'm going into students with disabilities. So immediately after graduating undergrad, I applied and went to NYU for students with disabilities. And fast forward, got my first teaching job a day after, and started my path of special education until now, 20 years later. And I am an ADHD coach, started my company Coaching with Brooke in 2018 at the time. And it was ADHD and executive function coaching. But the crazy thing about it is I didn't realize at the time that I had ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
When were you
yeah.
diagnosed? At what age?
6 months into coaching. So at 35, I realized I
Okay.
had ADHD and I went for the diagnosis and I passed that test with flying colors.
Uh-huh.
And the psychologist who tested me at the time recommended some behavioral and some medication So anyway, I tried the medication. It really helped for me because I already had some behavioral strategies. And then I met my husband 6 months later, who also had undiagnosed ADHD at the time. We got married and he thought one of his sons had ADHD. I was like, nope, he has ADHD. The other one has ADHD, and so do you. So get tested. We are one big family of ADHDers. Yay.
Wow. Okay.
So I was attracted to it the whole time, apparently, because I had it. And I didn't realize that that was what drove me to be more empathetic to individuals with ADHD, like myself.
Sure. That's a wonderful, wonderful story, and your family and everything too. Unfortunately, you probably have to take your work home and help your family as well
I
and
don't know what
coach
you're
them.
talking about. It's not in my dreams. It's not in the afternoon. It's not in the morning. It has nothing to do with transitions going to school. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, so speaking of ADHD, how do you diagnose ADHD and what do executive functions have to do with it?
Yeah. So good question. ADHD is generally diagnosed through a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker, a nurse practitioner, a doctor. And if the child is under the age of 17,
Mhm.
they have to exhibit 6 out of the 9 symptoms of ADHD in 2 or more areas of their life for at least 6 months. And that all had to happen before the age of 12.
Uh-huh.
So the symptoms that they're exhibiting are executive dysfunction. So we all have executive functions in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And they're like the task manager, the CEO of our brain. And people with ADHD have executive dysfunction, meaning that one or more of their executive functions is impaired. So if that's the case before the age of 17, 6 out of the 9 symptoms. After the age of 17, so if you're an adult being diagnosed for the
Mhm.
first time with ADHD, it's 5 out of the 9 symptoms, and you've had to have shown symptoms of ADHD before the age of 12.
Okay. And how does actually like a psychologist, is it a list of questions that you are asked?
Yeah, good question. So there's different type of assessments. So there's a neuropsychological evaluation. There's a psychoeducational evaluation. If you're going to a psychiatrist, they can do a psychiatric evaluation. And yes, usually there are questions that are given to the parents and the teachers, and it's an informal questionnaire that you fill out based on the observations of the child. So there's something called a Basque, there's a Connors, and from there, there's also observations that happen if you're doing a psychoeducational, which a
Mhm.
psychologist is coming into the school, or there's someone who's observing your child in the school. They're going to take a look at how he or she is functioning in the classroom. So there's those assessments. There's a more comprehensive assessment as well, where they take a look at all of the areas of their life, learning style, learning challenges and reading and math, and see if that has any sort of impact as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be impacted. They don't have to have a learning disability to have ADHD. But in order to diagnose the ADHD, it's really based on those surveys and the questionnaires.
Okay, good. Thank you. And now, how does ADHD affect a child's daily life, including learning?
Right. So, as I mentioned, it doesn't mean that they have an issue with reading, or they have an issue with math, or they have an issue with English, or they have an issue with social studies. So in order to have ADHD, you have issues with organization, prioritization, getting started, working memory. So because you have those executive dysfunctions, they can impact your academic performance, but it doesn't mean that your child isn't understanding math, or they're not understanding reading, or they can't perform intellectually. Doesn't necessarily mean they need a tutor. It's just that they're not absorbing the information because of the way that they're learning or the way that they're attending to the information. So in school, very often a child will have difficulty with organization, finding their right materials, being able to attend to the task because they lose track of where they are in the book, or like are so focused on something else that was just happening that it's hard to shift attention to get back on track.
Right.
The sustaining attention can be really hard. So there's a lot of ways that ADHD can manifest in school.
So we had something just pull up a slide, and that goes with question number 4. How does ADHD manifest in different settings, such as school and home?
Okay, so at home, the homework completion can be a challenge because, and I see this at my own house as well, your child might not bring back the appropriate materials because they don't realize that if they have to complete a worksheet, that they might need the workbook that goes along with it or the textbook that goes along with it. So they might just not realize at the time the appropriate materials that need to be brought home. So they won't be able to finish the homework that is necessary. Also, with ADHD, we see now or not now. And what not now is the future. So if a teacher is assigning homework that is due tomorrow, the child's more likely to remember those short-term assignments, but the long-term assignments, like studying for a test, a project, a report, that is usually forgotten because it's not in the near future. So homework completion with long-term assignments can be challenging because they might forget about it until the day before when it's too late, because it's hard to memorize all the information or complete a project.
Right.
Also at home, they can just explode because they're holding it all together at school, very often because they're masking at school. So they want to appear like they're paying attention. So they're shaking their head, or they're trying to sit still in their desk and not shake and not stim, to look like everyone else and not get in trouble by the teacher and not look different. And then at home, it all comes out and they're just completely and utterly exhausted. So your child may look completely different. And sometimes the parents are like, teacher, why don't you understand? Like, this is my child at home. And the teacher might not see because they're not showing their true symptoms of their ADHD.
Right.
Also, if your child is taking medication, it usually wears off by the time that they come home. And sometimes they might take a booster to get them through their homework or after school activities, but usually most kids, medication wears off. So then the true symptoms of the ADHD are exposed and it's harder to get the homework done. Transitions, coming home, following routines and responsibilities, like what do you need to do before you go to bed? When do you do your homework? When do you eat? Throwing your food out when you're done and cleaning the dishes and putting your socks in the laundry bin and going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. That is a lot of things to remember. And that requires working memory, which is multi-step directions. And usually we can remember the first thing and the last thing, but not all the things in between.
Right, correct. Which this leads us to our next question. Can you explain the workings of the ADHD brain and its implications for a child's behavior and cognition?
So ADHD has nothing to do with IQ, but the prefrontal cortex of the brain, again, is where all of the executive functions lie. And Dr. Thomas, there's many different models out there, but Dr. Thomas Brown, who's a very famous ADHD doctor, talks about the 6 executive functions. And one of them is activation, getting started. One of them is working memory, which is multi-step directions and retaining all of that. One of it is emotion. One of it is sustained effort, shifting attention. So if you have an impairment in one of the things that I mentioned or all of them, your brain is going to shut down when you are stressed. So just think about like doing some sort of recipe. If you're cooking, right? It's not about the end result. It's about all of the steps in between. You have to get the right ingredients. You have to remember all of the right ingredients. Then you have to put them in order in the right place, right? To make sure that you have the right materials too. Do I have the spoon? Do I have the mixer? Do I have the blender? Oops, I forgot that, right? That, and then we're not even halfway done in cooking, right? That is like the brain with executive functions. A child has a very hard time remembering all of those things and putting it all together. And that's how it's impacting their daily lives, because they are so focused on holding on to one thing to remember, and then everything else usually gets like swept away and forgotten about.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, because even when I read a recipe, I'm overwhelmed. So I can't imagine a child or, a young adult with the ADHD and trying to get through all those steps as well.
And then think about the cleaning up part after it.
Uh-huh.
No one likes doing that.
No, no. Everyone wants just to eat it.
Yep.
So for a child with ADHD or student at school, what does a typical day look like for an ADHD student at school and at home? And how can their parents better understand and support their children?
So no two students are alike. So I can't say that every single ADHD student is going to be the same. But common symptoms are hyperactivity and impulsivity and focus. So hyperactivity does not have to be external hyperactivity. It could be racing thoughts in your brain, and that's hyperactivity. Focus could be daydreaming. It could be having difficulty sustaining that focus. So if a child is expected to focus for long periods of time, the human brain is not meant to focus for long periods of time, first of all. But now you add ADHD to the mix, that's going to be really hard to stay attending to a test or to a long project task without losing focus and then coming back to it. So that's one thing. Another thing is, let's say they're switching classes, they might forget the materials from one class to the next, or forget what to take out of their locker or their desk in order to be prepared. Another thing is they might not be able to sit still in their seat, so they might have to get up and take breaks. Another thing is they might be off track when the teacher is talking, because they might not be auditory processors. So they might need it visually. If a routine switches, that might throw them off. To better support your child going to school and from school, what you can do is have some sort of like launch pad at the door and wherever they leave to go into the car when you're taking them to school, or the bus when they're going to school. So have them drop their materials there when they're done with their homework. This way, it's not sprawled out around the house. They know that it's in a bucket, or it's on a bench, or it's, on the floor by the door, wherever, but just make sure it's at the same place all the time. And when they're done with their homework, everything gets thrown back into their backpack. Okay. And then when they come home from school, I would have the same sort of routine if you can. I know after school activities can change and vary, and homework can change and vary, but if they have a routine where they come home, let's say, and have their snack and, take a little bit of some sort of break, right? Because they've been focusing for a very long time at school, they relax. And then you get started where they open up their agenda book, they check what's coming up for the week, they check what's coming up for tomorrow, and you plan out with them. And they might get better at this over time. So it really just depends on how old your kid is and how long they've been working on these skills for. But plan out the week so they can visually see what's coming up, because like I said, they're now or not that one. If it's not there, it doesn't exist. So help them plan out their week, help them break things down and chunk at home. If there's a project on Friday that's due and it's Monday, ask your child, okay, I see this is coming up. what do you need from me? How can I help you? How can I help support you? How much time do you think is needed for this? Um, they're probably not going to know how
Right.
much time is needed because we're
Thinking that,
also
right.
having difficulty with time blindness.
Uh-huh.
So something I would add 2.5 the amount of time that they say it's going to take them um, in the beginning, and then you'll get more familiar with their time management and time blindness. But have them map it out with you. Have them learn their learning styles, and there's free tests out there. There's one on my website as well. If they're a visual learner, if they're, and we're going to talk more about this later, but if there's a visual learner, an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner, study with them the way that they learn. That's also going to help them. Make sure you're in regular communication with the team and you're on the same support team with the school, because the school is going to support you with the child. It takes a village. Make
Sure.
sure that you understand the organization and the homework system at school. So you can all be transparent and in communication.
Well, getting, when we're talking about all of these strategies, is that where you can also come in to help? How does a parent seek your support, and how often do you see students in helping? Because I know, like in our academy program, we have an executive function coach, and it could be something simple as planning out the week and setting timers on their iPad.
Correct. Yeah. For our company, so I have 7 other coaches who work with me as well. And we usually recommend once a week, like you said. I think anything more than that, especially in the beginning, is unnecessary because you really have to test out an action plan with the child. So let's say you meet on Monday or even on a Sunday night, you plan out the week, like you said, and make sure that they have a plan for the week. So yeah, you might not know all the homework or assignments that are coming up, but at least they are learning the skills with you to become independent, to do it on their own. And then they can reach and connect throughout the week through text, but once a week.
Right. Okay. Okay. Because you're thinking long term too, going from elementary to junior high to high school where there's more demands and more after school activities. And then off to college where they leave, our home. And then they're off kind of on their own too.
Exactly, exactly. And the teachers, and this is not uncommon, but this happened to me also. But when your child with ADHD, it just so happens that your parents and your teachers very often become your executive functions of your brain. So if you don't know you have ADHD, that might be happening. And when you go off to college and you're a really smart student and you start failing because you don't know how to plan and organize and do all these things that we're talking about to enhance your executive functions, then it becomes a problem. So it's really important that, and I know there's so much pressure on parents to just, love your children, but it's so important that they do get the right help and they're supported where they become independent thinkers, of course, with your support, with the teacher's support and any extra support.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Are there specific evidence-based strategies for parents to manage distractions while doing homework for children with ADHD?
Yeah. So it's conditions, right? So what condition does your child work best in? ADHD or not, yes, there's differences in learning and differences in focus. So I focus better when I have headphones on because I'm blocking out extraneous noises and I can hear you, and it helps with my auditory processing, which also is a function of my ADHD. However, your child might do better while they're listening to some sort of background noise. It could be white noise, black noise, brown noise, whatever noise, while they're doing their homework, because that could be a secondary focus to help them really zone in on whatever it is that they're trying to focus. Also, light. Sometimes too much light isn't going to impact your child. They could have sensory issues and they might need a lamp, like a dim light. So you have to test these things out to see what works best for them. A high traffic area might not be the best area for them to do their homework. However, them coming to a spot that they can rely on with all of the materials that they need, like index cards, pens, pencils, extra paper, where they can just sprawl out and do their routine is helpful. So you have to figure out what works for them. Sometimes their bedroom with a desk is not the best place for them. Sometimes they need another area like the living room or the den. You just have to figure it out with them and ask them, do you like this bright light? Do you not like this bright light? Do you like sound? Do you not like sound? And test it out with them.
And then how can parents identify practical tips and strategies that suit the individual needs of their child with ADHD, especially during test taking and academic activities?
Everyone has different needs. I know this isn't the answer that I'm sure you guys want to hear. There are needs that are common for people with ADHD, but it doesn't mean that it's a one size fits all solution. So very often for test taking, if it's on their IEP, doesn't mean it's always necessary. Extended time is something that might benefit your child, because if their processing is slower, then they might need more time to finish the test. So if they're running out of time and they really know the material, but they're not performing on their test, I would take a look with the school and find out why they're not doing well on their tests. So is it that they don't have enough time? Is it not the right condition that we just spoke about? Do they need a private setting, a group setting, rather than a big classroom setting? Maybe they do need the classroom setting because they don't want to be separated from their class, or maybe they need, blinders in the classroom. So again, they don't feel separated from the class. Do they need one page at a time so they're not anxious about the whole test? Do they need tests read or questions read or directions read, repeated, and explained? Do they need one of those readers or blockers, like a color blocker, so they don't see the rest of the questions? Do they need to be spaced out? Do they need like a step-up process sheet with them? So again, there's so many things. This doesn't necessarily have to do with ADHD, but some people with learning challenges or dysgraphia might never remember their multiplication facts.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps they need a calculator. And the same thing with reading. Like if you're dyslexic, which a lot of kids with ADHD are, it's very common as a coexisting condition with ADHD, they might not be able to fully read the text, and that impacts science tests, social studies tests, even math tests, all their tests.
Uh-huh.
So they might need, unless it's testing their actual fluency and decoding, they might need someone to read the test for them. So it really is a complex condition, and that's why it's so important to get a thorough evaluation, because just because your child has ADHD doesn't mean that's the only thing that they need help with. They might need other coexisting conditions help, like learning disorders or OCD, anxiety, autism. There's other things that might come with it.
And like you said, it's a team effort, because it's not just the parent, it's your teacher, it's maybe your guidance counselor, it's your coach, it's maybe reading or math lab support. It's a little bit of everybody.
Exactly. So everyone needs to be on the same page and the same team, and see how are these things impacting your child in my classroom compared to this classroom? Like what's going on? Why is he doing so well in math, but he's not doing well in reading? Is it because he likes math better, or is there a problem with reading?
Right. Right. Sure. So speaking of routines, how crucial are routines in supporting children with ADHD, and what role do lifestyle factors play in their overall well-being?
Routines, I mean, we hate routines, but thrive on them at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like the oxymoron of
Uh-huh.
ADHD. So it's a very big paradox. So we need routines. We do. It helps with their anxiety, and it helps us be prepared and get everything together so we don't have to think so hard. It's like the recipe thing that I was talking about earlier. If you come to cook, or let's say bake cookies from scratch, right? And you come and all you have are, let's say, the flour, but you don't have the eggs and you don't have the mixer and you don't have a bowl. Well, how are you going to make the cookies, right?
Exactly.
So that's why the routines are so important, because if we're prepared ahead of time, our anxiety goes down
Mhm.
and our executive functions don't shut down. So if we can be proactive with routines and know what's coming up, it just lessens so much and we can be on top of that. And that takes off that whole looking for what's coming up, or, being a deer out of headlights. So it's nice to know what to expect, and your executive functions are going to work a lot more properly with a routine.
Right. So earlier you mentioned, having ADHD and maybe having another coexisting condition. Can you explore common coexisting conditions often found alongside with ADHD and their impact on a child's learning journey?
Right. So some of them I mentioned already, like OCD, anxiety, autism, learning disabilities, bipolar, um, dyslexia. So the learning disabilities with ADHD can be tricky because sometimes you don't know if it's a learning disability or if it's ADHD. So that's why, again, you have to tease out the thorough testing. Um, so your child might have a math specific learning disorder and have ADHD.
Right.
So if you know that through the testing, then perhaps your child will be able to get a special education teacher in the math class, or maybe a smaller math class, or get extra support in math, but might not necessarily need it in other subjects. Even if they have ADHD, maybe they need accommodations in the other subjects, like testing accommodations or prompts to refocus, but they might not need a special education teacher or service in those classes. So that's how learning disabilities can impact your child. And if your child has anxiety with ADHD, it's going to heighten the ADHD symptoms.
Mhm.
And sometimes anxiety can actually mask the ADHD symptoms because your child is so alert and anxious about everything that they try to do it all perfectly that it might not look like they have ADHD.
Mhm.
So it's just, again, something to tease out. And then there's auditory processing disorders, and there's so that's a chicken or an egg thing. So auditory processing, when someone's saying something to you, it might take you a second to actually grasp it and understand what they're saying. You might say, "What?" And then, but you know what they actually said like 10 seconds later.
Mhm.
But then some people might think that's ADHD too. And a lot of the accommodations for auditory processing disorders and ADHD are very similar. Like you might need someone to repeat instructions. You might need headphones so the teacher can talk direct, like an FM unit, so the teacher can
Right.
talk directly to your child and they could hear it, and it's louder and it blocks out extraneous noises. So some of them kind of overlap in how you would support a child.
Okay. Well, and I think it's important too to just get that proper diagnosis, and then
Yeah,
you have that, and then you can kind of figure everything out too.
exactly.
Okay. And then we have one more question before we go to our tips and takeaways. What are effective approaches parents can implement to support and manage ADHD symptoms to their child, like ways to manage ADHD?
Sure. So, um, coaching we talked about, so executive function or ADHD coaching, really getting clear on, and I know you have it in the academy as well, just making sure that their week is planned out, making sure that they're learning the proper study skills for their unique brain and their learning style, that they are like breaking things down and staying on top of their assignments, and they're bringing the right materials back and forth. Of course, the appropriate school placement. So sometimes we start with the least restrictive environment, which would be a general education classroom, but sometimes that doesn't work. Then you might need to push in a special education teacher. That might not be enough. Sometimes you pull the child out. That might not be enough. Then you go to a smaller classroom. So you move through that umbrella of more restrictive environments based on what the child needs. Of course, the proper accommodations, the proper services, support and social skills groups, because this does impact social skills. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or dialectical. I always forget what it stands for, but it's dialectic something therapy. But either way, both of them help with you being able to reframe the way your thoughts are. So with ADHD, you have a lot more negative thoughts than people without ADHD or neurotypicals. So we need to reframe the stories that we're telling ourselves to make them more factual, so it doesn't take over us and cause us stress and anxiety and depression. Medication, supplements, eating every 3 to 4 hours, and eating foods that work with our brain, staying hydrated. Very often we forget to eat and drink, and we can have sensory issues with eating and drinking. So if your child's on medication, making sure that they eat before they take the medication, because that can make them less hungry, and that they have water with them throughout the day, or else they can get headaches. Stress management, just like anyone else, exercising for at least 10 minutes a day, mindfulness. And this doesn't have to look like a yogi. This can literally be just like taking a breath. Maybe your Apple Watch reminds you to do that. It could send a zing to your wrist. Or when your child is anxious, they can do like breathing in and out by tracing their fingers. There's lots of different breathing strategies. And then reliable sleep. I know that's easier said than done, but if you can have some sort of sleep schedule, then your brain will be a lot higher functioning for the day. So when all of those things like medication, eating, stress, and sleep is out the window, your child's ADHD symptoms are going to be exacerbated even more.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Those are all great tips, especially, the nutrition, the sleeping, all of that. Wow, so we're already at 7:40. We've learned so much information about ADHD and executive function, tips for managing distractions at home, tools needed to support your child with ADHD, a day in the life of an ADHD student, strategies for academic success, and the crucial role of routines and lifestyle factors. We now have a nice 5 key tip that everyone can take away. So Brooke, if you can, as they come up, if you don't mind explaining them.
Sure. Tips and takeaways. So recognizing characteristics of ADHD and how these traits impact your child's daily life. It's important to really ask the right questions to your children, to learn what they're thinking. You might think you have an idea of what they're thinking and how their ADHD is manifesting, but until you ask them, you don't know. So ask them the questions, reflect with them daily, just so they can share with you how their traits are manifesting at school and at home. And also, of course, being in contact with the team, which includes the teachers, sometimes psychologists and doctors as well.
Sure. Okay. Tip number 2.
Right. So the daily challenges we spoke about in this presentation, and we want to make sure that we are giving the child the unique support that they need to address their challenges. So we're not going to just throw the kitchen sink at them just because they have ADHD. Sometimes less is more. So we want to make sure that we're meeting the child where they're at, and we don't overdo it, because if we overdo it, it can actually work against them.
Yeah. We'll go on to tip number 3.
We want to make sure that we have structured routines. Of course, this is really important. We hate routines, but thrive on it at the same time. So routines, 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 the end.
Yep, the end. Exactly. Tip number 4.
The evidence-based strategies that we talked about with schoolwork is the condition. So reminder of the lighting. It can be dim or it can be very bright. It can be loud or not loud. It depends on what works best for your child, and also knowing their unique learning style as well, auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, tactile.
Okay. And then our final tip.
Right. So the trial and error approach, just because something works now doesn't mean it's going to work next year. So it's a constant learning process, and you learn and the school learns and the providers learn what works best with your child through trial and error. And that's the same thing with medication. If you choose to go that route too, it's all a trial and error approach.
Yeah, sure. Because sometimes it might upset their stomach. Sometimes it's the dose is too low or too high. Great.
Or if they
Thank
have
you.
anxiety, sometimes the medication does the opposite effect, right? They get more anxious.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So those are great takeaways from our audience to really remember. So now we're going to turn to questions from our audience that were submitted before tonight and actually during the show. So I have a few that just came in as well. Let's see, we'll go with number 1. What is the best age to diagnose, or is there an age that is too young?
Yeah. So some people can diagnose kids with ADHD as young as 4. So if your child is exhibiting symptoms at the age of 4, you can go to your pediatrician and let them know that that's occurring.
Okay. And then here's a great one. What role do electronics play in a school setting for children with ADHD? Example, like iPad, Chromebooks.
Yeah. So it's tough, right? Because everything is electronics these days, from the smartboard to the Chromebooks to their phones to the iPad. So it plays a very big role in your child with ADHD. I know schools monitor Chromebooks and they have websites that they're not allowed to go on. So that's huge so they're not like flipping back and forth. So as much can be monitored as possible is great, but it also is a wonderful thing for ADHDers, because let's say you need to highlight the text or do text to speech, like all of that can be done on the
Yeah.
Chromebook or the
Yeah.
iPad or
Reminders. Sure.
correct, or reminders, or like instead of forgetting your materials, everything's on the Chromebook. So it's all there. You bring it home and you have everything you need for homework. So it can be an amazing thing, and it can be also something that needs to be monitored.
Correct. And let's see, here's another question from the audience, and then we'll get to the other ones. That's the one that they just gave us. Okay, so we'll move on to the ones from tonight. Are there any techniques you suggest to support a child who is both gifted and has ADHD?
Yeah. So when a child is gifted, they can also often lack some of the social, emotional awareness. So it's important that people who are gifted are given the appropriate opportunities for them intellectually. So if they're in an honors or advanced class or whatever, that's amazing. I think that they should be in there. And they will also need accommodations, but it doesn't have anything to do with their intelligence. It has to do with the fact that their ADHD or their autism or whatever the disability is, if they're gifted or twice exceptional, I should say, that they need. So still get the services and the accommodations, but provide them the challenge that they need as well. And also know when it's too challenging for them, because it might impact their emotional well-being. So if they can't keep it all together and you're giving them all the services and accommodations, then it might be time to take a look at the class and if it's just too much pressure for them.
Okay. And then here's another question that came in. What exactly is executive dysfunction?
Executive dysfunction is ADHD. It's essentially when your executive functions, which I had mentioned in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, they're not working properly. So people with ADHD or ADD syndrome have executive dysfunction.
Okay. How much does what our children eat affect ADHD?
So it doesn't cause ADHD. I know that's not the question. I
Right.
just want to dispel a myth there. It can impact them. So yeah, what we eat as ADHDers are very often connected to our ADHD because we can crave sugary foods like carbs or chocolate, because we're seeking dopamine. And our dopamine levels are very low often. They're out of whack. A neurotypical person, a person without ADHD or any disorders, are getting drips of dopamine all the time throughout the day. People with ADHD have very high highs and very low lows in dopamine. And the low dopamine is very often when they're bored, understimulated, or their bank of dopamine is out. So when your child is seeking dopamine, it's usually going to then impact their eating. Or if they have taken medication and their medication starts wearing off and they forgot to eat all day, they are going to likely binge eat at night because they are starving. So those are a couple of things. So just try to work in some sort of system where your child can eat every 3 to 4 hours. That's usually what's recommended with blood sugar and focus. And also make sure that you have food for them that they actually also like. I know it's challenging. So you can't always serve them the food that you want to serve them because they might have sensory issues. They might not be able to, like, it might feel weird in their mouth. So you can get protein and nutrients in a shake even. So like rethink the way that you're serving your kids. They don't have to eat the way that you want them to eat, as hard as that is, because like I said, sensory issues usually come along with that.
Right. Okay. How about with educational books all going online? How do we monitor kids between doing their work and games while giving them independence?
So I think that you need to make sure that they are doing the work before they play the games. So create some sort of system of trust with your child. So whatever it is, collaborative problem solve with them and say, okay, I know this is a gift that you have and I want to foster independence with you. So what do you think would be the best use of this Chromebook or this computer while doing your homework? How can we manage this where you're getting your homework done and you can play the games that you want? Usually they're going to give you a better answer than you came up with yourself. And then, of course, it's monitoring it. You are their parents. So you have every right to check and make sure that they're not abusing technology. If they start to abuse it, then they lose it for a period of time. But they should really have those expectations out there. So there's no surprises for you, no surprises for them.
Correct. Correct. So this is a question for upper elementary age children, like 5th grade, tips for self-regulation at home.
So self-regulation has to do with everything, emotional regulation. It has to do with executive functions. So really making sure that you continue to be nourished, like we said. So if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you are thirsty, you're going to be emotionally also dysregulated because you're not getting the proper nutrients to your brain and your body. If you're stressed at home because you have held it in all day, you're going to be dysregulated. So having some sort of transition activity to get your child back into a mode where he or she can focus is really helpful. They might need counseling sometimes for their regulation. They might be burned out by the end of the day. So I would also talk to your doctor and find out maybe what their energy levels are by the end of the day. Perhaps they need some supplements. Sometimes they need some breathing activities. The transition, do something with them with that transition. So it's not like immediate homework. And I know that's hard because, again, there's so many activities after school, whether it be soccer or dance, and it always changes. But if you can find something that is a nice transition from learning all day to then going to homework, that will help them regulate. And also, if you have those systems that we talked about, those routines, the things that they can expect, the dysregulation should lessen.
Okay. And to piggyback off of that, I'd love some tips for helping a child with morning and nighttime routines.
Well, I feel like we talked about that.
Yeah.
So just making sure that in the morning they do have a landing pad, a launch pad, or a place where they can put all their materials. I would also consider doing a checklist with them depending on their age. Keep it maximum of 4 things that they can work on, really short things, and agree upon a wind down time and a time to wake up to give them the proper and ample time to get ready in the morning. Perhaps there's just too much going on in the morning, and some of those things can be figured out at night, like laying out their clothes for school or their materials already set for the day. So you can reflect on that before they go to sleep, but also having just like that checklist that they can rely on, whether it be on their bathroom mirror or on the refrigerator or on the front door. 4 things max. And once they master it, then you can add another 4 things and keep going with that.
Okay. Then this one came in. Why are autism and ADHD correlated?
So 50 to 75% of people who have autism also have ADHD, not the other way around.
Mhm.
So that's the correlation between autism and ADHD. There's a lot of similar symptoms. They're both a spectrum. ADHD is a spectrum, autism is a spectrum, but the two are not created equal. So people with ADHD don't necessarily have autism, but as I mentioned, 50 to 75% of people with autism have ADHD.
Yeah. And then looks like might be our final question of tonight. As an elementary school teacher and mother of a high school ADHD child, what are the tools / strategies / steps to help all children?
Okay, so really just making sure that they know what's coming up. That's like across the map, making sure that they have some sort of scheduling system that they can rely on, where they can map out what's coming up for them and they are planning it out. So if you're an elementary teacher for your children in class, you can have a system on the board that they can rely on, that they know every day they come to school and this is the do now, this is the morning routine, this is the afternoon routine, this is your checklist to go home for your materials. For your high school student, they need that themselves as well. So they need to figure out their morning routine, their evening routine to some extent, and you can help them with it. Obviously, it's easier to help them when they're younger because they're more open to your help, and they then hopefully snowball the skills when they get older. But for a high schooler with so many responsibilities, SATs, ACTs, hormones,
Oh, yeah.
girls, boys, friendships, like there's just so many things to think about. They're like this little young adults, things get complicated. So, and then college, they need to be able to figure out how to manage themselves and how to manage their schedule so they know how to prioritize. And also, of course, don't forget empathy, to treat every child, your own high schooler, your own elementary students with empathy, because we're all human when it comes down to it.
Sure. Wow, we've learned so much, I think, tonight. So to all of our viewers, if you have any questions for our guest speaker, you can contact her directly and we'll put up her contact information. Thank you, Brooke, so much. I mean, it's been such a great hour learning so much from you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I
Yeah.
couldn't not answer one of the questions, so I put it in there.
Okay. And if anyone has any questions for me or anyone at the American Academy in South Florida, please do not hesitate to contact me or any one of us here as well. We're happy to help all of our families, whether it's the right fit for our school, or we can certainly recommend, and we can run many of our speakers as well. And then please join us next month on February 27th for another exciting episode of Experts in Learning Differences, a speaker series where we will be talking about the correlation between sleep and learning differences. So we have more insightful discussions, expert guidance, and valuable takeaways in stores for you as we continue to support parents on their journey to empower their children's education. And all of these talks that we have had, we will have the recording listed on our website as well. So Brooke, thank you again so much for being here with us tonight. It's been just a pleasure getting to know you and getting to know your background and everything. Yeah.
Thanks so
And then
much.
before we also say farewell, thank you to all of our behind the scenes staff that help make this show so successful. This is truly a team effort and we're a terrific team. So, and
Oh, I
parents,
just wanted to say the person who's coming on in a month from now, I know the practice in Tampa, I
oh,
believe it is, Brady Bradshaw. They're amazing. So make sure you come.
oh,
That's all
great.
I wanted
Thank
to
you for
say.
that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And parents, remember, we can always find ways to overcome challenges and help our children with learning differences be successful. From all of us at the American Academy, again, thank you, Brooke. I'm your host, Alex Rollins. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been an inspiration. Good night, everyone.